Capital is abundant. Understanding is scarce. The Dynamo Show goes deep with the new industrialists rejuvenating industry and commerce. Brought to you by Dynamo Ventures. Learn more at dynamo.vc/podcast. Now, here's your host, Madelyn O'Farrell.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Dynamo Show. We're excited to be joined by my colleague and prior host of the Future of Supply Chain podcast, Santosh Sankar. Santosh, thanks for being here.
Yeah, it's great to make my debut. Yes.
Exactly. Well, excited to have this conversation today. You recently published a piece on the broken nature of the skills trade pipeline, and I'd love to take this time to dig a bit deeper there, what your findings are, what your opinions are. You start out with a bold claim that America really chose the nature of this broken pipeline. So can you walk us through that argument? What happened in 1983, and why are we in the position that we are in today?
Yeah. So kind of my current thing I'm deep diving in and around is just this whole concept of the labor shortage in and around the industrial trades. And for those who have followed us previously, we use kind of part of that dislocation to inform our perspectives when we invest in and around robotics or physical AI in this day and age. But I'm a strong believer that not every function can actually be automated by machine. And there are various reasons, and that's probably its own thing for us to debate on. But part of me going down this boondoggle is to figure out, okay, like how do we get these positions filled? And as I was kind of dwelling on it and then kind of wading into, okay, how does one build a company in and around this opportunity? I kind of found the core reasons we're sitting in this situation today. And this all starts back in April 1983, and there was a report published called A Nation at Risk. And at the time, and probably what a lot of people remember it today as, is being an education report, like a state of the nation, especially against the backdrop of a more globalized or an increasingly globalized world back in the 80s. And the punchline was, hey, American students are not academically competitive. And the antidote for that is that we need to put everybody on the path to go to college. And from there, it has become a slippery slope. Ultimately, what it did was it set the backdrop for policymakers to effectively de-emphasize vocational education and the vocational trades. And that basically made it so that it was no longer an obvious or legitimate path for people who otherwise were seeking to be successful. And adding, you could say perhaps insult to injury, in 1984, there was the Carl Perkins Vocational Education Act that followed. And the spirit of this act was to take the vast majority of basic grant funding for vocational education and make it more inclusive. Allow it to go to students who might have had disabilities, maybe an economic disadvantage growing up, or even those that might have gone through some type of a correctional program. But this further compounded the optics that, hey, vocational trades are a remedial path. Successful people don't go there. And over time, what you saw was basically a pipeline that was gutted. Back in the 80s and prior to the 80s, you had employer and education partnerships that helped this kind of education system actually thrive, where had employers show up and say, this is what we need, this is how you do these things, here's the equipment or tooling in order to train somebody to do so. And as you went through these programs, you had employment with us should you meet these qualifications in a satisfactory manner. And guess what? Now we're kind of staring down a world in 2026 where we're seeking to reindustrialize our economy in certain aspects. But there are kind of positions that I outlined in some of my prior work. I picked 5 different positions specifically. And different reports might expand that to as much as 7 positions. But these 5 positions, electricians, plumber. No, I didn't have plumbers. I had electricians. I had millwrights. I had welders, and I had a couple others that, as you understand what they do, you go, oh, without these people, you can't have manufacturing facilities. You cannot discover kind of the new way to commercialize, critical mineral processing. And hell, even data centers very much kind of require some of these trades. But that's kind of where we are today. And frankly, these seeds were sown several generations prior to us, Madelyn. That's the unfortunate thing.
You make such a great point about the optics. Often when I see this conversation happening in public spaces, things will get thrown out about the salary potential of someone who's like an electrician or a plumber, for example, which can often be much more than white collar work, particularly in this day and age. But the sentiment or the response will be, when wealthy people start sending their kids to these trade schools instead of to college, then I will. Until then, I'm sending my kids to college, right? And so there's this sort of cultural entrenchment we have around these perceptions. And I appreciate sort of the backstory to what got us there. You have a couple big numbers that you highlight in your piece. 1.4 million trade positions that are unfilled by 2030. I think it's a $325 billion drag on GDP as a result. What's the piece of this problem that keeps you up at night? And what do you think gets underweighted in the public conversation?
So when you look at the broader number, that covers about 7 occupational categories. Those are electricians, they're plumbers, carpenters, HVACs, welders, mechanics, and construction professionals. And so that is what's behind that 1.4 million positions unfilled and that $325 billion estimated GDP loss. Now, I then go even further and I say, against this kind of backdrop of, manufacturing returning, critical minerals once again being a big thing, energy being a very key bottleneck that we're all suffering from, the grid needing meaningful modernization, and then the data center boom driven by AI, there's actually 5 more specific trades that we could call it the big 5, whatever we want to kind of ascribe it as. But these are the welders, the pipe fitters, millwrights, think of them as industrial mechanics of sorts, industrial electricians, very different than the electrician you and I might call to our residents, and then CNC machinists. Together, these are about 225,000 in annual openings. And what keeps me up at night is this is all replacement demand. This is not like net new to support growth. And I think the general statistic is for every 2 retiring, you have 1 coming online in general across these trades. That's pretty damn scary. And you know what? Some of these roles over time, maybe you can automate, or portions you can automate. I'm thinking of CNC machining kind of being perhaps the most ripe. But when you think about welding, pipe fitting, like sitting in there with capital equipment and diagnosing what's wrong and having to get your fingers in there to actually fix it, high dexterity, very hard to automate, not happening in my opinion anytime soon. And there's really no relief point in sight. Average welder, when I looked it up, is about 55. The average machinist in the U.S. is roughly 50. These are trades that are occupied by a prior generation. You don't see millennials or Gen Z kind of go say, hey, I'm going to kind of go be a millwright, or I'm going to understand how to CNC parts. It's not something, again, that the education system put to us as a very obvious path, or rather a viable path for people who want to be successful. And perhaps there's 2 things that are underweighted when everyone talks about this that drives me a bit nuts. These are industrial professions, right? Not residential. And there's absolutely stigma in general associated with these trades, but especially like when you think about the residential plumber or the residential electrician, they're not really identified as people who have high ambition and can kind of go be very successful. But that's not entirely true. The second is that the lag here has to do with the time it takes to find, train, and bring these people up, right? Most of these roles you have an apprenticeship period, and then you transition into being a journeyman, as they call it. And so when you shut down the pipeline in the 80s, that's going to drag you for several generations. And there has not been anybody that goes and kind of pushes and prods on, why did we do this? Did we go overboard? Should we reel it back a bit? And so it could very well take a generation in order to rebuild this pipeline of talent. But the fact is, we need these people today. And if you think that it takes somewhere around 7 years on average to become a journeyman in these trades. So what does that mean? If somebody starts this year, it's 2032, 2033 till like they become independently viable. That's not going to work. Or if it works, we are going to have to accelerate certain portions of this and provide them support. But perhaps that's at the root of this opportunity.
And with that, would love to get into maybe some of the solutions you outlined. I will say you made a comment about the dexterity required in a lot of these tasks and the limits of maybe the automation available and the automation coming online. It reminded me of kind of a cheeky comment you made a year or so ago about how perhaps the future looks a lot like Star Wars, where you have robots who are doing kind of the back office white collar work, but you need humans and other life forms, if you will, who are actually moving cargo on and off of trucks and who are doing those kind of smaller, more nimble physical tasks. So we'll see if that world plays out. But talking about solutions here, you were pretty critical about maybe the rebranding approach, right? Just renaming vocational ed and such. What do you think the playbook really looks like in practice?
So I think there is some value in highlighting to the 17-year-old who says, hey, I don't know if college is for me. Or, hey, like I want to work with my hands. Or I don't want to be stuck in an office. Or you know what a lot of people are thinking about is like how safe are white collar jobs, are desk jobs in this economy as we think about AI. And so that adds kind of an entirely new element that we probably didn't even seriously think about a couple of years ago. But I think there's value in highlighting, hey, you can make great money coming out of one of these programs, but you have to stick with it, right? And you have to be willing to commit like you would in any other career in order to kind of see your income generating capacity increase. But with that, you need the right structure and support behind you. So that breaks down into two things. One is capacity. So you have community colleges that largely have filled this void in, right? Or technical schools, technical colleges. They tend to run on a cohort basis, 20, 30 seats. Some might have more, kind of in the low hundreds. But this is still not kind of at such a scale that you're going to be able to address this opportunity or address this dislocation. And you also have to kind of think about who are the people behind these programs. A lot of these instructors usually look at this type of education role as a duty of giving back, or maybe kind of industry wore them down. They actually haven't been on a shop floor for over a decade. That means kind of their wherewithal and know-how is not as sharp as it once was. The equipment that a lot of these programs also have left around was purchased over a decade ago, maybe even longer. So they're not even using modern tools, let alone modern processes, and giving their students kind of the skill set that makes them as close to a turnkey junior as possible once they're out in the wild. And so that's an issue, right? But then we talked about the stigma. I don't want to belabor that, but it is important that like people recognize, hey, like as an industrial electrician, you can make well into the six figures once you kind of pass through your apprenticeship period and you are in that 6, 7, 8 year window, right? But what I would also kind of finish out by saying is there needs to be a more employer-led or a partnership with the employers of these trades. They need to be willing to show up and say, this is what we think needs to be in the curricula. We will help you fund the purchase of equipment. These are best practices. Let us give you apprenticeship periods through the course of your study. And by the way, here's an off-ramp once you finish your 2-year period that's very intensively education oriented. But part of, I think, the value here, and maybe I'm kind of jumping ahead of myself, is not just staying out of the loop once someone graduates and is placed into their first position, right? How do you stay with them kind of a few years into that? Maybe up until they're even considered to be a journeyman in their trade, right? How do you allow them to certify themselves, recertify themselves, expand their horizon and scope? One, there's business opportunity there. But two, that's how you make sure that you're not just putting people to fill these jobs, but you're also improving their capacity and increasing their capacity as, frankly, kind of this industrial renaissance that we talk about unfolds, because there's a whole lot of things we don't know. And that's going to require some of these people to be a bit more sophisticated than we might think they need to be leaving these programs today. So just kind of a bit odds and ends there on that point.
You mentioned the kind of employer-institution relationship in there, that they need to have skin in the game, that there needs to be an off-ramp for folks who are coming out of these programs, but that relationship is very broken today. In your opinion, who has to rebuild it? And is there a version of this that works without employers having skin in the game?
I don't think the status quo is going to fix this. There might be an ability for the existing institutions who are willing to kind of change, but they may not be incentivized to change given how they're funded and where their dollars come from with regards to the government. But if you have a party, and let's assume that you need to kind of go build a vertically integrated solution yourself at this point. It's someone who can effectively say, okay, we understand that there's an intensity to this. We need to have locations. These locations need to have certain type of equipment. They need to have capacity to matriculate a certain number of students every period, whether it's every 6 months, every year. Volume is important. And with that, there's a recruitment piece, right? Being able to tell the story, help people understand the opportunity, how they can have a great life, living the American dream by choosing this as a path. But from there, you do need to have an employer or employers, ideally, who show up and are willing to lean in, be a partner, do some of the things that I described, inform how this program actually needs to work. Because we've seen this movement, and I've benefited from it in more traditional 4-year bachelor's institutions, where if you think about some of the professors that you really enjoyed, odds are they were highly applied. They were not theoretical or academic in nature. Well, this is a role where you cannot be theoretical or academic. Like, you need to go do shit, for lack of a better word. And that's where you really do need these employers to show up and say, here's the equipment, here's how you use it, here are the processes, here are the cases or situations that you would find most frequently once you leave this program and if you were to seek employment within the industry. And you kind of really get intense in and around that. Now, there then comes kind of certain trigger points as to you can stay in that role. Maybe you're happy there. That kind of suits your ambition and what you want in life. But I think most people want to do better, right? And they want to improve themselves. How can you continue to work with these institutions to set up credentialing, re-credentialing? Don't do it just for the bureaucracy of it, but like, hey, like, how can I do certain types of electrical work? How can I be certified on certain types of capital equipment or manufacturing equipment? And then do that in a way that also perhaps teaches you a lot of leadership skills. Because if you think about crews out in remote areas, building electric infrastructure or telecom infrastructure against the data center boom, these individuals generally are part of teams. How do you work with these people? How do you manage? How do you lead them? That, as we know, that's a skill in and of itself, but it looks very different when you're kind of in distributed functions, when you have a lot of labor intensity in many of these roles.
I think that makes a lot of sense. The demand for industrial workers is surging off the back of the reshoring narrative. What do you think that urgency means for the investment case here?
I think, one, it's urgency. right? And when there's urgency, things tend to happen. If you're a founder looking to experiment on how this works, and I don't have all the answers, but I do have a future piece where like I have hypothesized, hey, I think these are the key elements based on the work I've done that could maybe yield a really interesting company, and hopefully that kind of attracts the right folks our way who want to have that conversation. But going back to your question, there's an urgency. So if you're a founder, odds are there are people who feel that urgency, right? And are living that urgency, and they're willing to give you a shot. And what I mean by that is they're maybe willing to give you feedback, see how you take it. Maybe at some point they're willing to give you a try. But two, there's also the, hey, like, does this just become like, because their hair is on fire, they become this really sloppy kind of early customer that might actually over the long horizon actually hurt you rather than help you, because they're kind of just in a disarray trying to kind of solve this thing. Maybe, but I think not. I think with the right folks, you can kind of figure out, hey, is there a partnership here? Is there a model where the employer helps us, they're a partner to us, maybe they cede certain commitments to getting the curricula up and going. So think of it almost like a platform fee. And then every person that is matriculated through at a junior level, there's a per person placement fee that could be charged. And then as they grow up, maybe there are kind of ongoing continuing ed fees, recertification fees as well. And you know what? Part of this has to do with kind of your talent department. Maybe they don't need to be running around as hard looking for people who are hard to find to fill these roles. It becomes more of, hey, when we find talented, really bright people, we actually encourage them to go through this institute that we've set up. And it might be even kind of, hey, a vocational training as a service, for lack of a better word. But right now, that's kind of what you need. You need somebody who's just laser focused on it, best of breed, pushing amazing people into the industrial trades.
Vocational training as a service. I love it. Well, excited to see what the details shake out as in your next piece as you explore a bit deeper. Anything else that you would highlight on the subject as we close out here?
I don't think so. There's definitely a large opportunity lurking here beneath kind of all of these press releases that we see. And you and I have stared at the data, right? It doesn't look too great for the U.S. when it comes to qualified labor across these categories of occupations. And if somebody were to set up shop right now, it tends to come down to electricity and proximity to labor. And the Midwest has that, and then the Southeast has it. But if you're to look at kind of the margin by which they have it relative to the rest of the country, it's relatively reasonable, but it's not meaningfully high. We're talking about like 35% type qualification rates. We need to do a lot better. We need to do a lot better. And I think that's going to be critical in us kind of realizing the promise and opportunity here.
Definitely agree. Well, Santosh, thank you so much for your thoughts. Great to have you back. Hopefully we'll have you join us again soon. And to our listeners, thank you for joining as always. We'll see you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked. And be sure to head over to podcast.dynamo.vc to keep up to date with our latest content, or subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Until next time.